I was living in Los Angeles and I was pregnant with my second child. And I was reported twice in 1 week to Child Protective Services. The first occurrence was at California Hospital in downtown Los Angeles. The social worker at the hospital reported me to Child Protective Services because I wanted to leave the hospital after giving birth to my son because my daughter was at home with the babysitter and I wanted to get home to her and be with my family. I delivered my son naturally, and there was nothing wrong with me or my son. There was no reason for them to keep us, but I was forced by the hospital to sign out against medical advice, and the social worker was very aggressive, and she stated, if you leave this hospital, we'll have to call security and the police and report you to Child Protective Services, which ultimately she did do. My story is really focused on mandated reporting and hospital liability. That's what I might want to focus on here. So that was the first occurrence, and that would have been fine. Actually, Child Protective Services didn't contact me or do anything in that regard. I'm not really sure what the social worker even reported, to be honest. That probably would have been the end of my story, except a few days later, my son had an accident that was prompted by my daughter, who was then about a year and a half. And we took her to St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica. We took our son to St. John's in Santa Monica for to be looked at. He received a CT scan. He had a fall, and the issue was his possible head injury, but there was actually nothing. So thank God nothing did happen to him. But there was an issue where the St. John's wanted to transfer my son to UCLA, and they wanted to transfer him in an ambulance. And I thought this was absolutely ridiculous because my son was not being treated for anything. He was not hooked up to anything. I was literally holding him for about 6 hours in the emergency room. And no social worker from the hospital ever spoke to us until I wouldn't transfer in an ambulance. Again, I was forced to sign out against medical advice if I was not going to transfer in an ambulance. And if I signed out against medical advice, then I would be reported to Child Protective Services, which I was. I took my son home from the hospital. I did pack a bag, and I did drive myself to UCLA, and didn't have to pay an expensive ambulance bill because of the physicians wanting me to do that. And Child Protective Services was at my door 3 hours after St. John's had called them. St. John's had reported my son as severely neglected, and my daughter, who was never even at the hospital at St. John's, as at risk. My case was only open for about a week, and it was closed. So my story is not nearly as severe as many people. But it's an absolute, it's just an abuse of power that I saw. There is this incestuous relationship between hospitals and Child Protective Services. And I believe that hospitals are using Child Protective Services as a way to limit their liability. Yes. And where were my rights? As a mother, as a parent. I know what's best for my child. I should be able to make decisions. Why should I have to answer to a social worker who knows nothing about me?
Yes.
Who are you?
Yes.
You come into my hospital room at UCLA and you question me for an hour. Where did you meet your husband? Why do you live in Los Angeles? Why did you live in Boston? What right do you have to ask me these questions? I've done nothing wrong, and there's actually nothing wrong with my son. Now, I'm not against Child Protective Services, as the social work, they did even do a home inspection that was kind of humorous. The social worker who came to my home was actually the most level-headed of them all, and she walked in and she said, "I'm very sorry I even have to be here." But my case was closed, and my child was never taken from me, but I didn't answer the door when LAPD were pounding on it either. That probably helped me. But this is a very important issue, and this affects everybody, your friends, your neighbors, your communities, everyone. It affects everyone, whether you have children or not.
Yes.
So thank you. Thank you for listening, and thank you all for being here and supporting this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephanie. These are all difficult stories to hear, but they're stories we need to tell. We